Rain whispered against the hospital windows, the kind of night where mercy seemed to stay outside. The woman stood trembling before the counter, her voice breaking as she begged the man in white for help. But his eyes, sharp and clinical, saw no plea, only inconvenience. The room smelled of antiseptic and indifference. Her words spilled like cracked glass, but he silenced her with a single gesture, his voice precise, detached. "We're not a charity." She flinched but didn't argue. Instead, she whispered a name, one that made the air feel suddenly heavier. He ignored it then, signing another paper, watching her walk away through the reflection of his own arrogance. But long after her footsteps vanished, the echo of that name lingered in his mind, like a shadow waiting to be recognized. The corridor fell silent once the door shut behind her. He tried to focus on his next appointment, but that name, Margaret Brooks, gnawed at the edges of his concentration. It was faint, like a whisper in the back of his mind, pulling him somewhere he didn't want to go. His signature faltered, his breath caught. Memory, like a ghost, pressed its cold hands against his chest. Somewhere in the labyrinth of his past, that name lived, tied to a night of pain, blood, and mercy. He pushed the thought away, unwilling to feel. But guilt, once stirred, is a tide that doesn't recede. When Nurse Lila approached his office, she saw the file spread open, his hand frozen midair, the usual confidence stripped away. "Doctor?" she asked softly, but he didn't answer. He only looked at her, not with anger, but something closer to fear. Lila, who had seen more broken men than she could count, recognized that look. "She's in the emergency ward now," she whispered. "Her mother's condition is worsening." For a heartbeat, he said nothing. Then he turned his gaze to the window, where rain washed the city in silver tears, and finally muttered, "Admit her." The words fell heavy, almost like confession. When he finally walked back into the emergency room, the air shifted. Nurses glanced up but said nothing. On the gurney, near the wall, lay an older woman, frail, unconscious, her breathing shallow. The name tag on her wrist confirmed what he already knew. Margaret Brooks. The sight of her face dragged him backward in time, to a dirt road, a wrecked bicycle, and a woman's trembling hands pressing a cloth against a bleeding boy's leg. His leg, the same one he now stood upon. He froze, realization breaking him open like a wound that never healed. He dropped to his knees beside the gurney, whispering her name as though the sound might pull her back. The years peeled away. He was 12 again, bleeding, scared, and held by a stranger who promised he would live. Now that same stranger lay dying, and he, the doctor, had turned her away. The irony cut deeper than any scalpel. "Please," he whispered, the word breaking like glass in his throat. For the first time in years, his eyes filled with tears not born of exhaustion, but of truth. The mighty man who thought himself above mercy was now its most desperate beggar. The night pressed down like a confession that wouldn't end. He sat alone in the doctor's lounge, his hands trembling against the coffee cup that had long gone cold. Every sound in the hospital, the hum of lights, the roll of distant trolleys, seemed to whisper her name. His mind spiraled backward, to that long-forgotten road, to the boy bleeding in the dust. A woman's arms, warm and trembling, had lifted him from the ground, whispering comfort through the pain. He had never asked for her name then. And now, fate had carved it into his conscience with cruel precision. Guilt doesn't age, it just changes its face. The memory came uninvited, vivid and cruel. The smell of dust, the hum of cicadas, the sting of sunlight. He was 12, sprawled in a ditch, blood trailing down his leg from a jagged piece of metal. The world spun, voices blurred, until a shadow fell over him. A woman knelt beside him, her trembling hands pressing a cloth against his wound. "You'll be all right, son," she said. He remembered her face. Kind eyes, tired smile, the scent of lavender. He never saw her again after that day. Until now, when she lay before him, broken by time and circumstance. By morning, the hospital had shifted from night silence to its daily rhythm, but for him, time had fractured. Nurse Lila found him still sitting by the patient's bed, his head bowed in silence. "You knew her," she said quietly. He didn't answer, but the truth was painted all over his face. "You can still make it right," she urged. He shook his head slowly, voice low. "You can't heal what you let die." Lila's eyes glistened, not with pity, but disappointment. "Then you've forgotten what healing means," she whispered before walking away, leaving him to drown in the echo of his own sins. Elena came back the next morning, her clothes still damp from the storm, her face pale but determined. She didn't look at him when she entered. Her eyes were fixed on her mother. He rose, words fumbling at the edge of his lips, but silence felt heavier than any apology. "She's resting," he managed to say, voice hoarse. Elena nodded faintly, her hand brushing her mother's frail fingers. "She used to talk about a boy she once saved," she said softly. "Said he'd grow up to help people." His breath hitched. The room tilted. The cruel symmetry of fate pressed its weight upon him like a verdict. When the alarms began to sound, it felt like the world itself had shattered. Nurses rushed in. Machines blared, and everything became motion and chaos. He barked orders, hands steady though his soul quaked beneath them. "Charge to 200, he shouted. But with each attempt, the monitors stayed flat, defiant. The nurse's voice broke the silence. "She's gone, doctor." He froze. The sound of the heart monitor's steady tone was deafening. For a moment, he didn't move. Then his knees gave way, his hands trembling above her chest. No amount of science could revive what mercy had already claimed. The ward fell silent after the machines stopped. It was a silence that didn't just fill the air. It pressed against his ribs, suffocating and merciless. The others left quietly, but he remained, unable to move, unable to look away. He had fought to bring back her pulse, but all he'd resurrected was the ghost of his own sin. Outside, the rain had stopped, yet the world felt heavier. The overhead light buzzed faintly, flickering over her still face. He whispered her name one last time, as if the sound could reach whatever part of her still lingered beyond the veil. But all that answered was silence, and the sound of his own heart breaking against the walls of his pride. When Elena returned from signing the forms, the air between them burned. Her voice trembled, not with weakness, but with fury too long restrained. "You let her die," she said. He wanted to protest, to explain the cruel sequence of seconds in medicine, but there was no defense for what he had done before she ever stepped through the door. "You turned her away," she continued, tears breaking through her anger. "You saw what she wore and decided she wasn't worth saving." He flinched, as if struck. Her words were scalpels, each one cutting closer to the truth hid buried beneath ego and success. In her eyes, he saw himself reflected, not as a healer, but as a man who'd forgotten how to be human. He walked out of the room without a word, but the truth followed him like an echo that refused to fade. In the hallway, he stopped, gripping the railing until his knuckles whitened. The world he had built, spotless, precise, admired, cracked open beneath the weight of conscience. His breath came ragged, his chest tight. He remembered the promises he'd made as a young doctor, the oath that once meant something sacred. How had it all turned into pride? He sank to the floor, the cool tile pressing against his palms as a sob escaped. Quiet, broken, honest. For the first time, he felt human again. But it came at the cost of everything he thought he was. Later that night, Nurse Lila found him still there, hollow-eyed and silent. She sat beside him without a word, letting the silence breathe between them. "Finally," she said, "you know, she never stopped helping people, even when she had nothing left to give." He turned to her, eyes bloodshot, voice barely a whisper. She saved me once. Lila nodded as though she had already known. Then maybe that's why you became what you are, she said. But you forgot who made you that way. Her words weren't cruel. They were the quiet kind of truth that doesn't scream, but still cuts deep. Sometimes redemption begins with listening to the pain you caused. He stood before the hospital board the next morning, his voice low but steady. I turned away a patient because she couldn't pay, he began. Every word was a wound reopened, every pause a reckoning. She died because of me. The room was silent. No interruptions, no excuses. For once, he didn't seek forgiveness, he sought truth. Her name was Margaret Brooks, he said, the syllables heavy, sacred. She saved my life when I was a child, and I repaid her with arrogance. The words hung in the air like a sentence already served. When he finished, no one spoke. He removed his hospital ID, set it gently on the table, and walked away. The echo of his footsteps sounded like freedom and punishment all at once. The news spread like a stain on white linen. Whispers followed him through every hallway, down every corridor that once carried his pride. His name, once spoken with reverence, now echoed in pity and disdain. He walked out of the hospital carrying nothing but the weight of his sins and the echo of the woman's final breath. The city outside felt colder than it had ever been, the neon lights flickering against the puddles like mocking stars. He didn't look back, not because he was brave, but because he couldn't bear to see the reflection of the man he had become. Redemption, he realized, begins not with forgiveness, but with loss. His apartment felt like a tomb now. Every certificate, every framed accolade, a ghost mocking him from the walls. He moved through the silence as if afraid to disturb it. He tried to eat, to sleep, to exist, but each breath tasted of guilt. He had spent his life building a fortress of success, yet all it took was one moment of cruelty to bring it crumbling down. The coffee on his counter went cold before he even touched it. He sat at his desk, opened a blank notebook, and wrote 2 words across the top. I remember. For the first time in years, his hands trembled not from precision, but from humanity. He began to write not to ask for forgiveness, but to confess what words could no longer contain. The letter was for Elena, though he doubted she would ever read it. He told her about the boy he once was, the pain he'd endured, the kindness her mother had shown him, and the man he'd allowed pride to create. Every sentence bled with sorrow, every word a step closer to truth. If there's anything left in me that resembles good, he wrote, it was born from her. When he finished, he folded the letter with trembling fingers and sealed it, as if sealing away the last piece of himself worth saving. Days later, he found himself driving down a road that memory had nearly erased. The countryside rolled beneath a pale gray sky, and every mile felt like penance. The village was smaller now, quieter as though time itself had retreated. He parked near an old wooden fence and stepped out, the scent of earth and rain wrapping around him like something familiar and forgiving. He walked to the spot, the place where a frightened boy once bled, and a kind woman knelt beside him. He knelt there again, tracing the soil with his fingertips. I never thanked you, he whispered to the wind. It carried no answer, only peace. That night, back in the city, he slid the sealed envelope beneath the door of the Brooks' small apartment. He didn't knock, didn't wait. Some truths, he knew, had to arrive in silence. The hallway light flickered above him, buzzing faintly as if to fill the emptiness his footsteps left behind. He stood there for a moment, staring at the door, the thin barrier between regret and forgiveness. Then he whispered, I'm sorry, though no one could hear him. As he turned to leave, a faint glow from beneath the door caught his eye. The golden edge of a new beginning, faint but real. Sometimes redemption doesn't roar. It whispers Morning crept through the thin curtains of the small apartment as Elena sat at the table, her mother's photograph beside a cup of untouched tea. The envelope lay there, unmarked, unassuming, yet heavy as a heartbeat. Her fingers hesitated before tearing it open. The handwriting was uneven, the ink smudged, the words trembling with confession. As she read, her breath faltered. He wrote not like a doctor, but like a man unraveling his soul. "She saved me," the letter said. "And I turned her away. I carry her mercy in my blood and her forgiveness in my nightmares." By the time she reached the end, tears had blurred the page. The letter trembled in her hands, a relic of guilt, but also of truth. She read the letter again and again, each word carving deeper into her chest until pain turned to quiet understanding. He hadn't asked for forgiveness, and somehow that made it more real. She imagined her mother's voice, calm and kind, saying what she always did. "Everyone deserves one more chance, no matter how late it comes." The words echoed through her like a benediction. Maybe mercy didn't die with the body. Maybe it lingered, waiting for the living to find it. She folded the letter gently, her tears now dry, her hands steady. For the first time since her mother's death, she breathed without breaking. When he heard the knock, he didn't move at first. It had been weeks since anyone had come to his door. He opened it slowly, and there she stood, the daughter, the mirror of the woman he had failed. For a heartbeat, neither spoke. Then she held out the letter, folded neatly again. "You forgot to sign it," she said softly. The tremor in her voice wasn't anger. It was exhaustion. "You don't owe me anything," he murmured. "I owed her everything," she replied. The silence that followed wasn't hostile. It was human. And in it, something fragile and sacred began to heal. They went together to the cemetery that afternoon. The air was still, carrying the scent of wet earth and the faint hum of distant bells. Beneath a wide willow tree lay Margaret Brooks, the woman who had once saved a child, and in doing so, shaped 2 lives forever. Elena placed a small bouquet at the headstone, while Adrian stood back, his hands shaking. Then he stepped forward, knees trembling, and whispered, "Thank you." The words broke something inside him, but what replaced it was peace. The wind stirred through the willow's branches, soft and forgiving, as though the earth itself had accepted his confession. They walked away from the grave together in silence, neither asking for forgiveness nor offering it aloud. Some wounds don't close. They simply stop bleeding. He turned to her once, his voice quiet. "I'm leaving the city," he said. "There's a small clinic out near the border. They take anyone. No questions asked." She nodded slowly, eyes glistening but calm. "Then maybe that's where you'll find her again," she whispered. He smiled faintly, the kind of smile that carries both grief and grace. As they parted ways, the wind carried her mother's words once more through the trees. Mercy never dies. It just changes hands. The road wound into the hills, far from the glass towers and sterile lights of the city. When he arrived, the clinic stood weathered but alive, a building of peeling paint and hope, stitched together by tired hands. Inside, the air smelled of herbs and old wood. A few worn beds lined the walls, occupied by faces marked by hardship, not privilege. He introduced himself simply, Adrian. No titles, no pride. The nurses didn't ask about his past. Perhaps they saw it in his eyes. That night, as he tended to a child burning with fever, he felt something stir in him again. Not power, not redemption. Something quieter, purpose. Weeks passed, marked not by appointments or schedules, but by the rhythm of human need. He learned to listen again, to pain, to laughter, to silence. The people trusted him slowly, their gratitude wordless but deep. One morning, a little girl whose arm he had stitched days ago brought him a wildflower and said, You make people better." The words hit him harder than any judgment ever could. He smiled. A real smile, unguarded and fragile. For the first time since Margaret Brooks' death, the air around him felt lighter. Redemption wasn't a gift to be given. It was a choice to be lived. The storm came without warning. Black clouds swallowing the sky, winds screaming through the hills. The clinic's roof groaned under the weight of rain. Patients huddled close as lightning cracked nearby. When the power failed, he lit lanterns and kept working, his hands steady though his mind raced. A young mother clutched her newborn, breath shallow, pulse fading. "Don't leave me," she gasped. He pressed his hands against her chest, his voice calm, eyes burning with determination. "I want," he said, and he meant it. The storm outside was chaos, but inside, Mercy had hands again. Weeks later, a letter arrived, the same one he had written months before. The handwriting on the front was unfamiliar, yet the message inside was unmistakably hers. "She would be proud of you," it read. Maybe forgiveness isn't about forgetting, but remembering the right way. It wasn't signed with a name, only an initial, E. He folded the letter carefully and placed it in his pocket. For the first time in years, he looked toward the horizon and didn't see regret. He saw possibility. The ghosts of his past no longer haunted him. They guided him. He gathered the villagers outside the clinic one evening, the air glowing with the last fire of sunset. "I'm not here as a doctor," he told them, "but as someone who forgot what it meant to care, and is learning again." The faces before him were weary, hopeful, familiar. He looked down at his hands, the same hands that once refused help, now trembling not from guilt, but gratitude. "To heal," he whispered, "is to remember." As the sun dipped below the horizon, the village bells rang softly in the distance. He closed his eyes, and for the first time, the silence inside him was not punishment. It was peace. It had been a year since he came to the village, and the rhythm of life had softened his soul. Yet even in peace, the past lingers like a whisper in quiet rooms. Some nights, he still heard her voice. Everyone deserves one more chance. He would wake before dawn, walk through the fog-veiled fields, and watch the first light spill over the earth. The guilt no longer cut like a blade. It pulsed like a heartbeat, alive but no longer cruel. He had learned to live with it, not as punishment, but as memory. Every scar has its rhythm, and is now beat in harmony with forgiveness. One afternoon, a small boy wandered into the clinic, clutching his chest, breath uneven. Adrian lifted him gently onto the examination bed, listening carefully to the faint flutter of his heart. The boy's mother stood nearby, eyes wide with worry. "He'll be fine," Adrian assured her softly, adjusting the boy's shirt. When the child smiled weakly, something inside him broke open, a memory of his own childhood pain, soothed by the kindness of a stranger. He placed his old stethoscope around the boy's neck and whispered, "Keep this. It once belonged to someone who saved me." The boy's laughter filled the room like sunlight, proof that mercy, once given, never truly ends. That evening, as twilight sank over the hills, a knock came at his door. When he opened it, a courier handed him a small parcel wrapped in brown paper. Inside lay a worn photograph. Elena standing beside her mother's grave, and a note that read, "She forgave you long before you asked." His eyes lingered on the photo until they blurred with tears. For the first time, he felt her forgiveness, not as words, but as presence. Quiet, unwavering, eternal. He placed the photograph on his desk beside his medical tools, where Mercy could always watch over his work. One night, long after the others had gone to sleep, he heard a knock on the clinic door. Standing there was an elderly woman, her voice trembling. "My chest," she whispered. He helped her inside, guiding her to a chair. Her breathing labored. As he examined her, a strange peace filled him. Her eyes, kind and weary, reminded him of Margaret. That same softness, that same light. "You'll be all right," he murmured. The woman smiled faintly. "You always say that," she whispered. For a heartbeat, he froze. Something in her tone, her presence. But before he could speak again, she laid her hand on his and whispered, "You've done enough." Then her eyes closed, her breathing steadied, and the night grew impossibly still. When the first light of morning touched the hills, the village awoke to bird song and the smell of fresh rain. Adrian stood outside the clinic, coat draped over his shoulders, watching the sun rise. The weight he had carried for years felt lighter now. Not gone, but transformed. In the soft wind, he heard her voice once more. "Mercy never dies. It just changes hands." He smiled through tears, his breath steady, his eyes lifted to the horizon. Behind him, the clinic door creaked open, and a new patient called softly for help. He turned, the light catching his face. And in that moment, he wasn't haunted anymore. He was home.